いかがですか、渡辺Dan desu. Hedda Hopper used to say, if you want to send a message, send it via Western Union. And for much of Hollywood's classical period, even film scholars felt that that's exactly what Hollywood did, that it did its most not to be preachy, not to try to make any social point, to entertain the public, to reinforce the whole idea of family and close-knittedness and being in a small town and knowing your neighbors and having that sort of milk of human kindness run through you. But as we all know, someone does not become an artist because they fit into that pretty picture. In fact, most people choose to become artists because for one reason or another they don't. So they can't help but try to go against that mantra and to actually tell stories that get their message across. Now, how do they do this? Do they do this in a kind of ham-fisted way by making sure that all of the different characters are equally represented, or allowing moments where people can give speeches? Or do they just do it on the fringes? And are they very cautious about it? At least in traditional Hollywood, it was the latter. And that is most cleanly seen in movies that take place in small towns. Often, especially in small towns that have a very, very bucolic element in it, where it's almost like a fantasy that you as an audience member could actually live there. What I would like to do today is compare two movies that seem very, very disparate, but they're actually very similar. The first of these is 1943's Shadow of a Doubt. This happened to be Alfred Hitchcock's favorite movie, and the screenplay was written by Thornton Wilder, and one of the other writers on it was Sally Benson. The second film will be Meet Me in St. Louis, which is based on a short story by Benson, so we see that there's an interrelation between these two films already. It seems as if the similarity should end there, but it actually doesn't. In fact, we can almost look at these two movies and say they are mirror images of each other. And I know you're thinking, oh my God, Dan has gone completely potty. How can an Alfred Hitchcock movie and a Vincente Minnelli movie possibly have anything in common, much less be virtual mirrors of each other? And I'm going to say that yes, indeed, not only can they, but they are. Let's start with Shadow of a Doubt, and let's begin by talking a little bit about Alfred Hitchcock. Now, Alfred Hitchcock was not an American. In fact, he was over from Britain. True, he came from a small town, but importantly, it was an urban town. So he was used to that kind of hustle and bustle of the big city where anonymity is high. Secondly, Alfred Hitchcock was, well, shall we put it this way, never somebody who was svelte or would make the cover of Physique magazine. No, he was a very rotund man, and it seemed as if, at least if we were to believe the stories that his daughter and his associates would tell, that he spent most of his life more or less celibate. Yet we know that there were passions burning underneath that surface, if we can also believe the stories that were later told, perhaps in private a little bit, by, first of all, Grace Kelly, and secondly, and much more infamously, by Tippi Hedren. Shadow of a Doubt takes place in a small town, and everything in that small town seems to be perfect. You have the cop on the street corner directing traffic to and from the library. You have young Charlie, who is late teens and very, very ambitious, and we sense that she probably wants to leave the town. She has a sense of adventure. She's not going to be satisfied with just being a garden variety 1940 style housefrau. Into this world comes her Uncle Charlie. Her Uncle Charlie is played by Joseph Cotten, who would go on to be, if not the most common of Hitchcock's villains, certainly one of his most memorable. And Uncle Charlie is from the big city. Uncle Charlie has led a very charmed life. Uncle Charlie is the person that everyone loves because he's so charming, and he's so witty, and he's so able to make people feel good about themselves. Uncle Charlie is also a sociopath who's a murderer. In fact, he's the Merry Widower murderer. And during the course of the movie, we slowly see young Charlie, in this case played by Teresa Wright, who was fresh off winning an Academy Award for Mrs. Miniver, beginning to realize that her namesake, her beloved Uncle Charlie, is a dangerous person. And not only does she realize he's a dangerous person, but because he's been so good at masking that nobody, especially her doting mother, would believe it. And so she finds herself having to fight him, even to the point where he tries to kill her. Now, she's rescued, but he's not done. He will attempt it again. Now, this is all done against the background of a small town. And within this small town, we have her mother, who's obsessed with all of those supposedly traditional wifely things. She bakes cakes, she makes cookies, she's very doting of her children. But if you look at her kids, they're not quite perfection. Her youngest daughter, Anne, who was based on Hitchcock's own daughter, Pat, is very bookish. So she seems to be going in possibly not necessarily a great direction, and possibly in the same direction that Hitchcock himself perhaps went. The father of the family is a banker. And as a banker, people are always making fun of bank robberies and of how he's ripping off the town and all of that. Now remember, we're not that far away from It's a Wonderful Life, which would be coming in the next few years, where we see bankers are not necessarily the nice guys. And remember also, this movie was made in '43, so the memories of the Depression and what happened in small towns, and particularly what a lot of bankers did in those small towns, was still fresh in everybody's mind. So as a viewer watching this film, you know that certain people were just the least bit uncomfortable with him. Coming into the city also from the outside, into the small town also from the outside, are two detectives. And of course, because this is 1940s Hollywood moonshine and you have to give at least the impression of a happy ending, one of the detectives does become attracted to young Charlie. And she responds with it, and when he first tells her that he's going after her uncle, she's horrified.
You are, really. You're a detective. There's something the matter, and you're a detective.
Charlie, listen.
I don't want to listen. You're not on a survey at all. You lied to us. You lied to Mother. You just wanted to get in our house. Please. That's what it is. What do you want with us? What are you doing around here lying to us?
Look, Charlie, you've got to listen to me. You've got to trust me.
You've done nothing but lie.
She can't believe him. Not that she doesn't believe him, but that she can't believe him. You know why? Because she's known that there's something not quite right about her uncle. His little behaviors have tipped her off.
It's none of your business.
Oh, Uncle Charlie, you're hurting me.
Oh, Charlie.
Your hand.
There's something that's not there, but because she's in this perfect small town, she can't accept it. This is not something that happens in a small town. So after she's been told this, she crosses the town square, she walks in front of the police officer, and this time he's mad at her for not paying attention to the cross traffic, goes into the library, makes them open it again. This is not something you do in a small town where everything can wait till tomorrow. And then she reads a newspaper, sees the evidence, looks at a ring her uncle has given her, and realizes he is indeed the Merry Widow murderer. Her entire world has collapsed, and yet everyone around her is behaving as if nothing has changed. But there is a darker side. When Uncle Charlie begins to suspect that she's not buying his act anymore, he takes her to a restaurant, and at that restaurant is one of her former classmates, who's clearly someone who made the wrong choices.
I'm sorry I was so long. We're awful busy.
Whose is it?
Ain't it beautiful? I'd just die for a ring like that. Yes, sir, for a ring like that, I'd just about die.
Now, this is 1943, so we can't say what those wrong choices were, but we can guess. The fact that she's so embittered that she's into money, she's not looking for a relationship, that something else has happened. So now we're seeing that behind this nice facade, there's a heart of darkness. Later on, at the end, before they go to a concert, there's a group of people at the house, and they're all being charmed by Charlie, especially a widow. But as the mother is telling the story about how sad she was when Charlie left, when the older Charlie, the evil Charlie left, we see that everyone else is looking at her sympathetically, except this widow. This widow is looking at her straight ahead and with clear eyes. Why? Because she has experienced a big loss. She understands exactly what the mother is saying, and she empathizes. So we see that even though the film has a happy ending, more or less. I mean, Charlie's dead, evil Charlie is dead, and good Charlie is clearly now has a beau, and they're standing outside the church while everyone is talking about how great man Charlie is. We sense that this small town as a whole has been exposed, and the picture that it is revealed is not 100% pretty.
Clang, clang, clang went the trolley. Ding, ding, ding went the bell. Zing, zing, zing went my heartstrings. From the moment I saw him, I fell.
Our second film is Meet Me in St. Louis, and this one is going to take place in the past, the past from the 1940s, into a nostalgic past of the turn of the century. Now remember, this movie was made in the very, very waning days of the war, and people were tired of the war. People were longing for a past that perhaps never existed, but Vincente Minnelli was damn determined that they were going to believe the beautiful vision he was going to put forward. But like Alfred Hitchcock, Vincente Minnelli was not somebody who fit into the secular world. And what do I mean by that? Well, first of all, Vincente Minnelli was one of the gayest people in Hollywood, one of the most overtly gay people in Hollywood. Because Vincente Minnelli was an outsider, because he came from the world of production design, because he came from the stage where artifice ruled, he looked at the world of early 1900s America as being nothing but an elaborate set. And that elaborate set, just like any kind of play, was made up at least partially of phoniness, at least partially of people who had ulterior motives, very similar to the same kind of things that happened in Shadow of a Doubt. Now, there is no evil uncle who is going to come around and disrupt everything and make this family unhappy. No, instead, what there was the threat that they would be leaving this bucolic city where they have this beautiful house, which unfortunately after 1960, Psycho looks entirely too much like the Psycho house, so it carries with it a little bit of that threat. But their entire way of life is going to be disrupted. The happiness that they have, the seeming cohesion of the neighborhood will be lost. And for the character Esther, the younger sister, the middle sister, one of the middle sisters, this is terrible, because she's fallen madly in love with the boy next door, and this means that she might lose him, because as we all know, when we're teenagers, we believe that every affair that we have or every love feeling that we have is the last that we shall ever have, and they become so important and so meaningful, and we don't quite realize yet that no, it's just one of many, and you will get over it. And again, we see that even though this family seems to be a model of perfection, there are certain things about it that are perhaps not quite comfortable. Upstairs in the family lives Grandpa, played by Harry Davenport, fresh from playing Dr. Meade in Gone with the Wind. And he's a grandpa who has a collection of hats and is very eccentric. So we know he had a wild and adventurous life. And there's probably something very sad about him being stuck now, having to live with his son and his daughter-in-law and the kids. No, he loves them, but we sense that he's had a life of adventure that is not going to be his moving forward. The mother, played by Mary Astor, very, very wise casting choice, because this was not so long after she had been the subject of a massive scandal because of her own sexual peccadillos with George S. Kaufman. And this was this wasn't the redeeming role of her, because she certainly won an Academy Award in between for The Great Lie. But this was the first time she played a mother who didn't have a little bit of a sexual air to her. I mean, even in Listen, Darling, she was a widow, but she was someone who was certainly available. But here she's not. Here she's satisfied. And unfortunately, we don't get a chance to see how she's really holding the family together. Instead, that is left to, and this is true of haute bourgeois families, the maid.
It's all right, Katie. Yes, it's all right, but I had to tell your poor mother another flock of lies.
Well, Katie, they're only white lies.
A lie's lie, and dressed in white don't help it.
The maid, Katie, knows everything about everybody. She knows the secrets that they're all keeping from each other, and she either helps them keep it or kind of tattles on them. But you know she has a heart of gold. But we also get the sense that if it wasn't for her, the kids would feel disassociated. And then there's Tootie. Now, Tootie is the youngest child, and she's the most complicated character.
Oh, Margaretta, never seen her look so pale.
The sun ought to do her some good.
I expect she won't live through the night. She has 4 fatal diseases.
And it only takes one.
But she's going to have a beautiful funeral in a cigar box my papa gave me, all wrapped in silver paper.
Now, Tootie was actually Sally Benson in real life. And in real life, not reflected on the screen here, because as we know, when we're writing, we often take events in our own life and we idealize them. We make them better than they really were. In real life, the family did indeed move to New York. She didn't get a chance to see the World's Fair. But guess what? She became a very, very important writer, writing for people as august as Alfred Hitchcock and Vincente Minnelli. So it was certainly a compromise worth taking, perhaps. But Tootie is into the Mauvais side of childhood, and I gotta hand it to Margaret O'Brien, whom James Agee even said that she's the most wonderful actress in Hollywood.
Agnes and I put the lady on the track. When John Pruitt saw the streetcar and heard the bump, he dragged us up the alley and tried to make us stay in the woodshed so the policeman wouldn't get us. So policemen never pay attention to girls.
After a grand ball, when everyone seems to be happy, she's feeling depressed because she doesn't want to leave. And Judy Garland reminds her that they'll be going to New York and they can take everything except the snow people. And that sets the little girl off. The ferocity that she's been depicting has been a cover for someone who's very hurt and who has a vulnerability. And it is only at this moment that the father, played by Leon Ames, leaning out of the window, gets that he's been too focused on the material in the world, not enough on what's really the best for his family. And yes, he makes that decision that even in the most hard-hearted of us can bring a little tear to our eyes when he decides, no, they're going to stay in St. Louis. Now let's go to the star of the picture, Judy Garland.
How can I ignore the boy next door? I love him more than I can say.
Now this was Judy Garland's first adult performance, and she did not want to play the role because she was tired of playing teenagers, all 22 years of her. It's also the first movie where she was starting to exhibit those personalities, shall we say, quirks, that would later become the dominant side of her personality. But she's still fresh, she's still young, and even though she and Vincente Minnelli did not like each other at first, by the second or third week of the shoot, they were madly in love. At least he was in love with her talent, and she was in love with the fact that finally here was a man who understood her the way her father, who had also been gay, had understood her, and hadn't looked at her as just a meal ticket because she could sing, but could appreciate her for her other qualities. And Minnelli brought out the glow in her, the youthfulness, and even the sauciness that heretofore little Dorothy Gale from Kansas hadn't really exhibited.
Tootie, how did you get that lip?
She'd always been willing to be second banana to Lana Turner in the Andy Hardy movies or in Ziegfeld Girl, but now we saw that she was worthy of being loved by the boy next door. Unfortunately, and this again is meta text, not main text, the boy next door was played by Tom Drake, who was shall we say, another Pershing square boy. And doesn't even make an attempt to hide it. I mean, there's nothing about him that's masculine.
John!
And Minnelli, to his credit, uses that as a joke. This is a boy next door who is not the football captain. Yes, he plays basketball, but he's not someone who is innately tough. In one scene, Judy comes around and beats him up when she thinks that he has been responsible for hurting Tootie when they had the trolley accident. And he doesn't know how to woo her properly. In a scene where she sets it up for a romantic encounter, he compares her perfume to the kind his grandmother wore. So he's an awkward boy next door, and he's also a boy next door who can't really be relied on. At the moment of extreme crisis for her, the last Christmas party they're going to be having in St. Louis, he failed to get his tux out of the cleaner, and it looks like she's going to have to go to the party with her grandfather. I mean, talk about bleh, having to go to a ball with your grandfather. And yet, he comes through, and he somehow gets the tux back. And there's this wonderful scene when the grandfather is not happy with Judy because she and her sister had been playing a trick on an Easterner who had come in, and they were being very rude to her. And because of that, she'd been forced to dance with all the creepos in town, which, by the way, is an uncomfortable moment in the film. And certainly Vincente Minnelli, who had been considered a creepo, has no sympathy for these guys. So it's an odd note in it. Finally, she has a chance to dance with Grandpa, and he dances around the Christmas tree, and out the other side comes the boy next door with her. So they have that romantic clinch, but we see that it is a dream. It is a romantic dream. The very next scene is Tom Drake says to Judy that yes, we can get married. We even though he's not really old enough to get a job, and she's going to be moving away, and she has to take the common sense approach and say, no, we can figure something out. And we know when somebody is saying we can figure something out, you know that they're saying that, yeah, if I move to New York, this is probably it for us, and hopefully we'll have this memory. Of course, we then have the happy ending, and we see everyone going to the St. Louis World's Fair. And here again, and I've gotten into fights with people about this, so I might be wrong, but Minnelli presents the World's Fair as this spectacular event. And note that word spectacular, because it undermines everything else in the movie. The movie had been about small values, about enjoying the little things in life. And now we see Judy and Tom Drake and the rest of the family getting all excited about the lights going on and being dazzled by what's out there. And it's almost as if Minnelli is telling us, yes, it looks all glistery right now, but you still have the rest of your life in front of you, and you might realize that the bright lights of the fair are but temporary. So once again, we see that a movie from a genre that should be very happy actually has a side to it that perhaps is not so happy. And between Alfred Hitchcock and Vincente Minnelli, two outsiders, we see this depiction of American families and even the glorious past presented in a way that has just enough of a touch of cynicism that keeps them interesting to this very day.
So